Hi, my name is Chia Morgan, and I am elated to be here with Westwood Heights for their district wide parent meeting. And we're talking about something that is very important, probably to all of us, me as a community member, you as a parent, and then the superintendent of the schools, the parent facilitators, the teachers, the principals, everybody. We're talking about our children and keeping them safe. And so I just want to thank you all for having me here with you to talk about something that matters to so many of us. Today, we will be talking about human trafficking, and this is a three-part series for human trafficking. And then talking about returning to school is a two-part series. But human trafficking is so important, and oftentimes we tend to think that it only affects a certain population. We think it only affects poor people or women or girls. But in order for us to really move forward with getting human trafficking out in the open as the crime that it is, we need to talk about it and we need to get rid of some of those myths. So I have a PowerPoint today and we will share some of that. But if there are any questions that arise, you can put them in the chat box or you can just raise your hand and I'll stop and try to address those questions. I don't consider myself to be an expert on this because it's ever changing and it's ever evolving, but there are a couple reasons why I'm more qualified, I will say, to talk about human trafficking. But I try to shy away from the word expert because things change so often, and what you think it's something new to learn about it. So, as I said, we are dispelling the myths for human trafficking for this first part of the series. Now, the first thing is first. I am Chia Morgan. I am representing Chia Morgan Professional Services, which is my business. I'm not representing my current employer or any of my previous employers. These views have been researched and the references are in each slide. So they're not the views of my own, but they also are independent of my employer. So, who is Chia Morgan and why has she been selected by Westwood Heights to speak to their families? I'm a mother of a beautiful 8-year-old little girl. I'm a community activist. I am the creator and founder of the annual Blessed to Be a Blessing dinner. I founded the Steps to Healing a Broken Generation Family Fun Day. I have brought the Your Vote Matters initiative in partnership with the Michigan Secretary of State, and just other community initiatives. I'm a former member of the Genesee County Human Trafficking Task Force, and it was an eye-opening experience. And I am a proud member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. As far as my education, I have a bachelor's in social work and a master's degree in public administration. I have been a victims advocate for victims with human trafficking. I've worked hand in hand with Sheriff Swanson and his team at the Sheriff's Department on different cases. And so this is something that's important to many of us in our community. And yeah, that's just Chia. This isn't about me, but just a little background about why I'm here. So again, we're going to get right into human trafficking. If you're here on this call, I would like for you to jump in, share your feedback, answer ask any questions that you may have, and I'll try my best to answer them. I'm sorry, I got a little tongue tied right there. So here we are. Human trafficking has a standard definition throughout the United States, and it is talking about it involving the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. So, with that, human trafficking is broken down into two categories as defined by our federal government. There's a labor component and there's a commercial sex act component. In order for someone to be under 18 years old, there does not have to be any force or coercion for that to take place. I just keep getting tongue tied. So, in order for there to be a federal definition, there has to be some legal standards that took place. And so, human trafficking is known as modern day slavery. And there's legislation that goes all the way back to the 1920s that was aimed at targeting forms of human trafficking, more so with like the Women's Violence Prevention Act and the Crime Victims Acts and all of those. But starting in 2000, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was authorized by a bipartisan group in Congress and it became law. It's been reauthorized by 3 presidential administrations since that time. And so, what makes it so unique is that it calls for a multidisciplinary team of advocates and police and social workers and prosecutors to all work together to do their part to try to alleviate our communities of human trafficking. And one thing that really stands out about this particular act is that it ranges all the way from the president to just a concerned citizen. The president has duties where he must delegate a specific person to lead this during their administration. When we talk about Genesee County, they have the Ghost Squad that is through the sheriff's department, and they are a special task force that go out and try to recruit victims of human trafficking and bring them in to rescue them. And then they also do their part to prosecute those who have been offenders and those who engage in this heinous crime and stripping others of their freedom and their rights and all of that. Before I go on, are there any questions about anything we've discussed so far? All right. So when we talk about Genesee County, it's a unique area because we have the task force, the Ghost Task Force, and they go out and they do their stings. And if you pay attention to anything with the Genesee County Sheriff's Office, or if you watch the news, Sheriff Swanson comes on every Wednesday and he does a community roundup and he talks about big crime things that have taken place and initiatives that the sheriff's office is doing. Almost every Wednesday when he presents these, there's something that he's mentioning about human trafficking. And that is very, I don't know, troubling that on a weekly basis of a community of Genesee County and the whole county, every week he has something to talk about human trafficking. So that shows how it's a problem in our community. So if we're right here in the beginning and we've talked about the definitions of human trafficking, and you say, I think I know someone who may be dealing with that, I wanted to stop and share these resources because these are very important. Voices for Children, that's our child advocacy center here in the county, and they do amazing work for children who are victims of everything, but specifically their work with human trafficking, it is admirable. The YWCA of Greater Flint. And then you have Beauty for Ashes. They actually have a team that goes out and tries to rescue victims and provide them with resources they have, even if they're not, ready to turn in their offender or anything like that. And we'll get into that a little bit later. The Genesee County Human Trafficking Task Force, they bring together so many different groups of people. They bring law enforcement and members of the prosecutor's office and clergy and just community members who want to be out there, mental health experts, physical health teams and experts and all of that. And so they're there saying, how can we combat this in our community? And had we not been dealing with the coronavirus and the restrictions of that every January, in response to Human Trafficking Awareness Month, they have a big community event and they have speakers and they just bring awareness to this. They raise money so that they can ensure that they are able to meet the needs of these victims who are being recovered from such a heinous crime as human trafficking. And then I've shared information about what the Genesee County Sheriff's Department is doing. And at the conclusion of this, anybody who attends, they will be able to have a list of these resources that are available. So when we think about human trafficking, we oftentimes think about the white van, and we talk about when you go to Target and when you go to Kroger, or Meijer, or anywhere such as that, you don't park next to the white van. I think us ladies, we've told our children and we try to scurry around to another part of the parking lot because of the white van. And human trafficking offenders, they know that most of us have this picture of this scary white van with no windows in the background. And so they're out doing human trafficking in other ways while we're just worried about the white van. And I don't want to exclude the white man because many school districts, right before COVID happened, I think in the 6 to 9 months leading up to March 2020, there were so many school districts in Genesee County who had to actually send notification home to parents and say, be on the lookout. And of course, it was a white van, but we need to be a little more vigilant and look for more than the white van. And, I know for myself in my neighborhood association, there was a post in the group and it was saying, watch out, there's a white van that's moved in our neighborhood. And everybody was kind of keeping their eye on the van. Come to find out, the person was laying carpet, but because of what we attribute to the white van, everybody was on the lookout for them. And, it makes sense that they would lay carpet, but the white van has just gotten a really, really bad rap over the last couple years and months. And so it is, before I go on, is there anybody that would like to share what their view of human trafficking was? Like what you think it is, what you know it is, anything like that? So I think it's important for me to share my own misconceptions because I haven't always, had an opportunity to be on the Genesee County Human Trafficking Task Force or work hand in hand with some of these agencies that are doing good in the community for victims of human trafficking, and then working to ask that there are stiffer laws for those who are offenders. And so for me, I truly thought that the white van was the end all be all. And I thought it was like another form of people being forced into prostitution. And for a long time, I thought that that was just it, where someone was being forced into that. And that's a part of it, but it's so much more to human trafficking. It is really a complex crime, and it affects so many of us in our communities. And so while we're able to dispel these myths, that's going to be one of the most important things that we're able to do, is to learn about the myths that are here, shake those myths, and then be able to make those who actually are perpetrators feel uncomfortable with being able to perform these type of crimes in our community. They'll know that we're watching, all eyes are on them. So some common myths that are known, not just for the purposes of this presentation, but throughout many multidisciplinary groups nationwide. These are some of the top four, and this is coming directly from the Department of Homeland Security's website. Human trafficking does not take place in the United States. That is not true. The United States is actually touted as a global leader in combating human trafficking. It does take place here. And as a part of the Trafficking Victims and Protection Act of 2000, the United States works in partnership with other countries in order to provide reports to the UN so that this is attacked on a global network. And then for those who may come into the country and are smuggled for labor trafficking or sex trafficking acts of human trafficking, there are protections for them. They're able to apply for like visas called the U visa and the T visa, and this kind of helps them eliminate who is really victims and not re-victimize them. And so this is a very unique clause. So yes, it does take place in the United States, and the United States also has in writing with some of their partners that they trade with, that if they do not do their due diligence to try to combat human trafficking and submit their reports and their numbers and their data to the UN, they could get sanctioned by the United States. Victims are only those who are poor, while those living in poverty are more susceptible or more vulnerable to becoming victims of human trafficking. It can affect anybody from the CEO to anybody in this country because it plays on your psychological. So it doesn't matter who you are. Once somebody tries to control your mind or does have control of your mind, then they can do a lot of things that they
What
shouldn't.
you doing, Jordan? What you doing?
Human trafficking only involves sex or sexual acts. That's not true because there's the labor component. And because so many of our police departments are taking their time and setting up stings and posing as children and putting themselves in situations to catch those victims, and they're doing great work there, many people forget that the labor aspect is there as well, where people are working for pennies on the dollar or no pay at all, or being told, if you send your children here to the United States, we'll take care of them, we'll get them a good education, and then they're putting them into this illegal labor. and it's just the dirty underground world that no child should have to participate in, or adult. But for the purposes of that statement, no child. And then if victims want help, they can just leave. And that seems sensible and it seems logical, that if you don't want to be in the situation, if it's unsafe, it's unhappy, just get up and leave. But it's not always that simple, because if someone has controlled your mind, one thing that we know and we have found to be true about victims of human trafficking, they've been told, we'll kill your mother, we'll kill your kids, we'll tell your job about some of the things that you're doing. And so it's easier for them to just stay, and they continue to stay against their will, and they want to leave, they're hoping to leave, but once your will is broken, someone kind of has you. So there is some truth to the matter of things that I want to share with you about human trafficking. So a lot of times we think about ladies and we think about girls, but males are victims of human trafficking as well. And those young males or those older men who identify with the LGBT community, they're more vulnerable by these offenders. Internationally, when they come together at the UN conferences and all of that to address human trafficking, the experts believe that labor trafficking is more prominent, but sex trafficking receives more attention and is most reported. And so this kind of goes back to when I was saying, people will tell families, if you send your kids to the United States with us, we'll make sure they get a good education, we'll make sure they get good health care. And then they come over here and they're thrown into working in the salons, and they're thrown into working in spas and parlors and sweatshops and all of those type of behaviors. It can be any industry. These are just those that come to mind. And then they don't get an education when they should be in school. They're actually being trafficked on the labor side. And a lot of people think that human trafficking is just an abusive situation, and violence does take place. But as I aforementioned, the psychological control is more than anything, the threat, the fraud, the intimidation, and threatening to harm their family. And then one thing that is very true about human trafficking, they get their victims addicted to some type of substance, and so they threaten to withhold that. And so that becomes another aspect. So again, in their mind, if someone is on a substance that takes them out of their normal course, that's psychological as well. So I would like to share this video. It is from The Ring of Silence, and it actually premiered here in Flint by Nicole Bowers Wallace. She wrote it, and it was at the Capitol Theater in 2018, and it takes real life scenarios and puts them on the screen. And it shows us how our children are so vulnerable to this human trafficking and how we can keep them safe. We'll talk about that next. But when you read this and you look at this, keep an open mind, and any questions that you have, let's discuss them.
Tell me everything.
Okay. Well, I sent him a Snapchat this morning. You want to see?
Yeah.
He wants to hang out today.
April?
Hi.
Hi. How are you? I'm so glad you came.
I'm good. I'm so glad you're real. This place is awesome.
Good. I'm glad you think so. And it's not raining.
There's no heating?
Yeah, you know.
You couldn't get the fire going?
sometimes make me very frustrated when you ignore me. I sit here wondering, did I do something? She said she'd help me, and then she disappears for days on end. Look at me when I'm talking to you. What did I just say? I was talking. What did I say?
Disappears for days on end.
Take it off. Let's go. Take it off. I'm gonna do it for you.
She's just scared.
Bring it back for me, please. Legs apart.
Before I go into the next segment of this, are there any questions about human trafficking or what we just watched in this particular video?
Do you ever wonder where someone goes when they...
So in this particular video, in Ring of Silence, there's a couple things that I want to talk about what we just witnessed here and excuse me, what we saw, because it's very important to understand what we're seeing in these type of events and what our children are exposed to. And so in this particular movie or trailer, she was very strained in her relationship with her mother. And it was one of those situations where she felt that her mom was too strict on her and she wanted to take time away from her mother. And in the interim, this guy was able to get into her world and he was able to get into her head. And that's one of the things that we don't want to see happen to our young girls. And so there's a couple things that I would like to talk about coming from that slide. And, you know, our people look for love for multiple reasons. There is the instance of just trying to find love. I think that any of us can relate to wanting to be loved and having romantic relationships and then having someone to talk to and having a friend. And then when you get to a certain age, you want to be free and independent of your parents' rules. And so sometimes our children, they just want to go out and be on their own and they want to make their own decisions. But that's not saying that they want to become victims of human trafficking. But these offenders, they play on that. And so if we go back to the video and we saw him say April and she said, "I'm so glad you're real," he kind of paused because he knew that he wasn't real. He kind of wasn't expecting her to say that. And then in the scene, you saw her guy friend saying, "Tell me more, tell me everything," because they were very, very close. Well, then for those of you who haven't seen the full Ring of Silence movie, they kind of alienated her from her friends because they took her on double dates and she met friends who was dating her guys' friends, but these were just women who were other victims who they used to kind of groom her. And so she started spending less and less time with her male friend and talking to him because she had these girlfriends and they were shopping and these guys were buying her very expensive clothing. And so these are kind of signs to look for in your children. If you have someone who's been, you know, friends since McMonagall and now they're in the 9th, 10th, 11th grade and without warning, they don't talk anymore, or your kids' friends are saying, "Hey, I haven't talked to Chia in a while, Mrs. Smith, you know, we really did not have a falling out," then it may warrant some conversation with your daughter about what's going on with her and to kind of pay attention. And I know that, you know, when our kids get older, none of us want to be the super strict parents who don't give them freedom and privacy. But in this world of human trafficking, we have to do our due diligence to protect our children, because those who will seek to victimize them, they're doing their work to make sure that they're not taking any days off. And so, check your kids' phones and check their social media, and make sure that you share location one with another. And I know that, parents are working, and sometimes it's not feasible to be at home with your kids all the time, or you're allowing your children, as the world begins to kind of open back up from COVID, you're allowing them to be themselves. Take time and share that location with them, even if it's on your lunch break and you stop and call your children and say, where are they? Sometimes they may not be defiant. They may have gotten themselves in a situation that they can't get out of. And as you've seen in the Ring of Silence trailer that I showed, she thought this guy really liked her. She thought everything was romantic. They met outside at the park. She was expecting the fireplace to be lit, and he was just grooming her. And so your kids may get in a situation where they think, I found this new guy, he's incredible, he's amazing, and he has an ulterior motive. So there's a couple things that I want to highlight as we talk about this: signs to watch for in your children and signs to watch for in school. And so if your daughter, becomes a little withdrawn and she seems that she doesn't want to talk to you, give her a little more grace and keep talking and keep pushing and find avenues to reach out and get her talking. Because, like with this guy, she didn't want to talk to him and she tried to pull away. And he told her, it makes me angry when you ignore me. She was no longer her own person. She didn't have her free will to do that. And then, even, as far as educators and lunch monitors and security, or whatever your role is in the school, if you see a child that's coming in to school and they are sleeping a lot, or they're going from all A's to all E's, and they seem apathetic about school and they just don't care about anything, have a conversation with them, because they may have been being trafficked all night long, or they may have little to eat, just enough to keep them alive. And one thing is, those who traffic young children, they make sure that they go to school because they don't want to raise a red flag. They don't want somebody looking for them throughout the day. I mean, if you're breaking the law, you don't want to send the police right your way, starting this trail of looking for them. And then another thing to look for, even in parents or educators, if you have a young girl who starts dating an older guy all of a sudden, ask questions. It may not be a situation of her being fast and anything of that nature. Or if it's your son, it may not be a case of him being managed. They may have thought they were dating someone. They may have met someone on the app. April thought that this guy was just someone her age, a little older, but she didn't think he was as older as he was. She definitely didn't think that he would look to make money off of her giving her body away to multiple men. And so start paying attention if they're, coming in with all these lavish gifts all of a sudden, and then they start going into these real low spells because the gifts may have shifted, and now they've realized that they're in a situation that they can't get out of. And remember, human trafficking is psychological. So there's no telling if they told them, if you tell your mom, we'll kill your mom, we'll take your little siblings, we'll put your siblings in your place. You never know. As far as educators, if you see someone who, wasn't dressing nice at first, and then all of a sudden they're coming to school with really lavish gifts, or you see a young girl who's getting dropped off by someone older, don't be afraid to say, who is this dropping you off? And, if she says, it's my cousin and he's in town and he brought me, or it's my brother, he's been in the military and he's here for a month, check the emergency card. Like, you don't want to call the parents and automatically alarm them and say, oh, your child is being trafficked. It really could be her older brother, Will, or it could be her older cousin, Mark. But if you check that emergency card and you tell Mark, oh, we can't release her because we don't have an emergency card, or you call mom and say, hey, your son, Mark, is in town, can you send us something to release her? Then that's keeping the communication open with the parents. And that's also closing the gaps that allows these people to come in and harm our children. And then, kids, I think all districts, from when I was, younger and cell phones were coming out, there's a blanket no electronic policy at school, and we know that kids bring their electronics to school. And so here's an opportunity for educators and those working in the schools to kind of reverse how you put in those rules. So if a little kid is coming and saying, hey, look at this on my Snapchat, instead of just shutting them down and saying, you know, you can't have your phone and you shouldn't be on Snapchat in school, it's an opportunity to listen to what's on Snapchat and then remind them, you know, you shouldn't have this phone at school, because what they may be showing you is someone who is posing as a child on Snapchat, someone who has said something out of line to them. And so that ring of silence, it was only a 3-minute clip, but it gives us so many different conversations and scenarios that we can have about why our children are changing. And it doesn't just have to be that they're, you know, fast, mannish, or that they're an emotional teen who's going through puberty. All of those things could be factors in place, but it's always better to be safe than sorry, to protect them from possibly being trafficked or being groomed to be trafficked. Another thing is, if you have children and they have a best friend and you're letting them go off with the best friend, make sure that you have the number, you know, if they're teenagers and they're going out on their own, make sure you have those friends' cell phone numbers. And on the inverse, make sure that those friends have direct access to you, because, you know, Shonda may notice something about Tasha and she doesn't want to bring it to Tasha because Tasha has been so agitated lately. But out of sheer concern, you know, she may want to call you and say, hey, Mrs. Moore, I'm really concerned. Can we talk about this? And so make sure that there's that open line of communication. If they're your younger children and they're going up for play dates, make sure that you're meeting the parents. Make sure that you're getting phone numbers and addresses, and take your children to the house so that you know exactly where they are. And these seem like basic safety things, but you never know which house, you know, is a human trafficking house, or what they're into and what people are doing. So just be very vigilant and making sure that we're taking care of our kids. If you see, you know, a student started getting dropped off by somebody who you've never seen before and they've been in your district for 10 or 11 years and something feels off, you can always write down the license plate. You don't have to do anything about it, because just because they pick them up, it doesn't mean that something is going on. But in the event, you know, in that unfortunate event, you'll have some piece of evidence to say, hey, I did have this, or I did write this down. So it requires all of us to have our eyes open and communicate a little bit more. So moving on from that particular spiel right there, and it being closer than we think, there's a little bit more truth that I want to share with you all. In 2018, Michigan was reported in the top 10 for human trafficking, but for nationwide, they were number 2 for recovery. We're in the top 10, but our number was actually 6th for human trafficking. And so some may ask, what makes Michigan, which is one of the smaller states, so prominent for human trafficking? You can go to the northernmost part of the country to the most southern point of the United States and just go on 75. That goes right through everywhere. And so it's easy for, you know, a victim to come in from the border with their offenders and be brought to Michigan, or be brought somewhere along that that corridor. And so we have to make sure that we're paying attention. If you have a student who's always traveling with their friends a lot, you know, pay attention. And they may just love to travel, but again, with human trafficking, we can't take anything for granted. And then youth who run away from foster care, they're more vulnerable to sex trafficking and its dangerous physical and mental health consequences, STDs, unfortunately, and anxiety, depression. Any type of mental health can be affected by that, or it can agitate, you know, just agitate people. It was not a pleasant experience to be a victim of human trafficking. So keeping that in mind. And one of my other misconceptions we talked about earlier, I used to always think Michigan is number 1 for human trafficking. There's no statistics to support that, but there are statistics to show that we're up there, and that our multidisciplinary teams, they're doing their due diligence and making sure that they're recovering victims and getting them out there and safe. So those are 2018 statistics from the state of Michigan website. But there's also some information that I think is pretty alarming that people should know. In 2019, the Michigan Crime Report showed that there were 813 victims reported. There were 153 traffickers reported and 62 businesses that were also reported in that time frame. So if you think about 813 victims and 153 traffickers, those traffickers are pretty busy and they're doing their due diligence as well. So the most important thing that we can do is to make sure that we're paying attention, we're shaking these myths, we're talking to our children, and we're communicating one with another because they're working, they're not stopping, they're not like letting up on these things. And so there's a couple resources that I want to share with you as we close out and prepare for part two, which will be internet safety as it relates to human trafficking. There is help and there is support, and Michigan is doing their due diligence, but I'm going to share information for the human trafficking hotline. Their phone number is 888-373-7888. That's 888-373-7888. And for someone who may watch this and say, I think I'm being trafficked, or I know I'm being trafficked, or I think someone is being trafficked, there's also that text line, and that's 233-733. And you can either text help or you can text info. Again, that's help or info to 233-733. And if you just want to go on their website and find a little bit more about them, you can go to humantraffickinghotline.org. Again, humantraffickinghotline.org. So I am Chia Morgan. I am a community activist here in Flint, and I have a vested interest in making sure that human trafficking does not continue to plague our communities, but more importantly, that none of our children become victims in the future of this heinous crime. It is the number two growing crime enterprise in our country. So it's here to stay, but we have to do our due diligence to make sure that it's not here comfortably and that we are making people know we will not stand for this. I look forward to seeing you all again on Wednesday, February 24th at 12 p.m. and again at 5 p.m. as we talk about internet safety as it relates to human trafficking. Thank you for your time.